everyone, welcome to School of Scarlet. I am so happy to be here with you today. So today we're going to be talking about my adventures in sex therapy, and I have a lot of them, so stick around here for that. First, I want to ask y'all a question, and my question is, what is the one thing that every human being loves? Anything coming to mind? Well, it's sex. S-E-X, sex. Yet, people are so ashamed and scared to talk about it. There's not really any teachers teaching about it. There's just basic level stuff, and most people are actually having pretty horrible sexual experiences. And so I'm going to be talking to you about sex today in the most natural sense of the way that it can be. So stick around. I'm going to be sharing that here with you today. Sex is the one connector amongst us all. It's the one thing that brings life into this world. It's the one thing that physically connects us. It's the one thing that almost takes us out of this world. If you can imagine when you're having sex and you've had an orgasm, it's an out-of-body experience. And so it is the one thing that I consider the closest thing to my non-dual experience. So I really connect those two things, and I've written a book about it, Euphoria, and I've written other poems and many things around this, because the energy is so strong and it is equating to basically that experience that I had. Now, I want to share with you, sex is really a very natural thing. We're born into this world actually neutral. We're not for sex or against sex. We are just born naturally here into this world. And we don't have any preconceived notions about it. We're not monogamous. We're not thinking about, all of these different things that we later think about and we get stressed about. It's not that. All of those things come from our people around us, our environment, the teachings, the religions and things that we involve ourselves in. So I'm going to share my experience with you, which is pretty unusual, I think. So I grew up in a Christian home, and in my home, we didn't really talk about sex. It was just not something we talked about. But one thing that was kind of obvious to me was that the body was to be covered. And that created a lot of shame for me that later I'll unravel for you. But I was always concerned with covering my body. So anytime I had any bit of anything showing, I was concerned to cover it up. I was a very sensitive child. So when people told me that something was wrong or I shouldn't do something, I took it seriously. And so I was very concerned about keeping myself covered at all times, how I was sitting. I was also taught different things about going into restrooms and how they were dangerous and just different things. So I was always very anxious about going to the bathroom, about my down there area and what was happening with it. If anything was off, I had anxieties over these things. And I'm talking about child. I'm not talking about teenager. So these were the things that were going through my mind even back then. Those were other times, right? So we experience more of a freedom now in sexuality maybe than we did back then. But things such as swimsuits, we weren't allowed to wear swimsuits that were two-piece or anything like that. So at all times I was concerned that I should be covered, and if I was swimming that nothing had gone up or down or whatever. So I was always concerned about covering my body. That became sort of like an obsession for me. So later on, when I became, let's say, a woman, right? They say when you have your first period, I was introduced to a little bit more. That's when I was told about how babies are created and, had all that birds and bees talk with my parents. And so I was shown a book. It was very, it was like a learning experience. So I saw all of that. I realized that. And of course, like many other kids that age, they had already seen all of that. But anyhow, I was, playing along with it. The information they were sharing was nothing new to me. And that's the thing about the sexual education, is that it's very basic. Sharing the birds and the bees is not equating to a sexual education at all. It's essentially a warning or an education of how babies are created, which most children know by the age of puberty. So that is not in any way any kind of education or anything. It's just acknowledging that something has happened. So that's what it was for me. I listened to that and I went to my room, and it really was nothing for me because I had already known about the act, seen the, everything, like my friends, everything had been already happening. So it wasn't anything new to me. But what was new was fear. All of a sudden I had a new fear in me now. I was now a woman, and now I had to fear the fact of getting pregnant. And I didn't all the way understand things because I carried a lot of shame, like I said, about covering up my body and things. So when I did engage in things with boys, even if I kissed with them, I would get feelings of fear that I was going to become pregnant from kissing a boy and things like that. So my fear was very, very deep. And so it was a new fear that would now had come onto my life, and it was really not something I wanted. I was already starting to have the feelings now of liking boys. I had my first crush. So my body wanted this to engage with boys, but the fear and the shame was so horrible. So essentially, I continued on as a young girl, and then I got my first serious boyfriend around the time I was 15 or 16. And that was my first serious boyfriend. And we really spent time together. It was a long-term boyfriend. He was actually, we had a history together. So it was more than just anything else I had experienced. So I had experienced now real love. And this is the power of love. So love has the power to overcome fear, my friends. So align yourself with love. Go with love. Some people have always said maybe I'm a little bit of a hopeless romantic. I love the romance. I love all of that, going off and, with your partner and all this stuff. And I love that because it has always paid dividends for me. It has always expanded me to exponential lengths. And so has sex. So I will never, ever deny the power of love. And if you are a romantic and you love to engage in relationships, romance, all of that stuff, do it. If it's your joy, enjoy it. Have pleasure in that. That is expansive. Every time I've allowed myself that, even when I've been fearful or worried about the outcome, everything has flourished into joy, love, peace, harmony. That's how I had my non-dual realization, is through following my heart in a relationship. Anyhow, pulling it back to this time. I was now a young girl, and I had been now in my first relationship where there was true, real love, unconditional love. There wasn't anything I could do or he could do that would be wrong. We loved each other. We had plans to be with each other. We had plans to marry, many different things. He cared for me, even though he had maybe sometimes bad habits. He protected me of everything. He never let me stray into anything. He was the most protective of people. So I had trust. I had trust there. And so I began to open, and I began to allow myself to be seen a little bit more. And we agreed to a certain time to really to have that first time together. This was a real connection, and we were meaning to spend the rest of our lives together. And I knew, even within my Christian faith, that, oh, well, it might be okay if I be with him now. It doesn't really matter. In a couple years, we'll be married. So I justified everything in my head because I was still trapped in the programming and dogmas of Christianity. So I leveled everything out and I said, okay, we're good to go. He planned an amazing evening, and to this day, he's still the top 5. So I will tell you, I had an amazing day and evening and everything like that. And I will tell you, that awakened something within me. I realized everything everybody had told me was a total lie. It was amazing. My first experience was nothing like anybody had told me, not even what my friends had told me. It was totally amazing. And to this day, it's still one of the top 5s, which is shocking to me. So there was something very specific about my initiation at that point. I had to have had that. And if I was really to explain to you what happened that first time, which I do have a platform that I do share those type of story times. If you're interested in that, email me, schoolofscarlet@gmail.com. We have a school with many different areas of learning. And in that story, you will learn and you will see what went on that night. And it is not your typical thing. It was something very unusual, and it was very unusual. I don't know how this young man knew all of these different things or what, but it was a very unusual experience that you cannot forget, and that awakened many aspects of sexuality for me. So after that, there was no stopping this. I knew that this was an amazing thing, and there was no way that I was going to deny myself something like that. So I continued on exploring this, and at that time I was a young teenager. Now I was a little bit older. As soon as I got out of high school and kind of tried some different things, my career path kind of shifted. At first, I wanted to do a little bit more medical field and things like that. Suddenly, I went into the psychology field. Now, psychology is a broad range of things within humanity, and it can also encompass sexuality. So I began to immerse myself in a lot of that stuff. And at that time, I was kind of trying to look for a job. And at the same time, I was in this program of psychology that required certain hours and things of volunteering. So I came across an ad for a sex therapist assistant needed in Houston. And so when I saw this, I said, whoa, perfect. This is going to be perfect. And it said, they would prefer someone that was in university, that was learning, somebody that could learn. And so I thought, wow, this is perfect. So I applied and I got the call and I went for the interview and I met this sex therapist. He was Hey, y'all. Head on over to School of Scarlet Sex Ed to catch the rest of this episode. And you're going to want to. And don't forget to subscribe.